The gavel didn't echo like thunder, it merely tapped, sealing my fate with a terrifying quiet. I walked into the biting wind, listening to the rhythmic crunch of my heels on the ice. I had just lost custody of my daughter to a man everyone thinks is a saint. I did not cry. I simply adjusted my coat and headed toward the office Christmas party. They think I am broken, but they have no idea what is coming. My name is Grace Holloway. I am 34 years old, and I am a senior data analyst for North Star Metrics. My job is to find the truth hidden inside chaotic numbers, to create order where there is none. But as I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the gray afternoon, my own life defied all logic. I had just lost custody of my daughter. The winter wind hit me like a physical blow. It was the kind of bitter, dry cold that freezes the moisture in your nose instantly. I stood at the top of the concrete steps and waited for the collapse. I expected to scream. I expected to fall to my knees and weep until my throat bled. But I did not cry. I felt absolutely nothing. My body was a hollow shell, and my veins were filled with ice water. I stared at the parking lot. The world looked desaturated, stripped of color. I replayed the last 10 minutes in my mind. I saw the judge, a man with a tired face, looking over his spectacles. I heard his ruling. He cited stability. He cited financial consistency. He cited the erratic behavior documented in the files submitted by my ex-husband, Evan Mercer. Evan. I closed my eyes for a second. I could still see him sitting at the defense table. He wore his navy suit, the one I bought him 3 years ago when he said he wanted to look professional for a meeting that never happened. When the judge spoke, Evan did not cheer. He did not smile. He simply lowered his head in a gesture of humble gratitude. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. But I saw him look up as the bailiff led us out. He caught my eye, and for a split second, the mask slipped. His eyes were not sad. They were laughing. "You never stood a chance," I whispered to the empty air, mimicking the voice he used only when we were alone. I began to walk toward my car. The parking lot was nearly empty. My heels struck the pavement with a sharp, rhythmic sound. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, but the chill came from within. How did I get here? I am an educated woman. I am the primary earner. I am the one who stayed up every night when Harper had a fever. I am the one who knows she needs her stuffed rabbit on the left side of the pillow to sleep. Yet, on paper, Evan had painted me as unstable. He had twisted my anxiety, my exhaustion, and my anger into a portrait of a woman on the edge of a breakdown. And the court believed him. I reached my sedan and gripped the door handle. My fingers were stiff. I looked at the passenger seat where Harper's car seat used to be. Evan had taken it 2 days ago. The emptiness of the back seat hit me harder than the verdict. It was a void that swallowed all the light in the car. I checked my watch. It was 5 o'clock. The North Star Metrics Christmas party was starting in an hour. "I can't go," I said aloud. I just can't face them." But I knew I had to. My boss had been sympathetic but firm. He told me that skipping the event would only fuel the office gossip. He said I needed to show everyone I was fine. If I went home and hid, I would just be proving Evan right. I would be the unstable, depressed ex-wife he claimed I was. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the dashboard. The silence in the car was deafening, but as I sat there, something shifted. It was not hope. It was something colder, sharper. It was a strange premonition that the story was not over. Evan thought he had won the war, but he had only won a battle. I started the engine. The low hum of the motor vibrated through the steering wheel. I was going to that party. I was going to put on my dress, drink the cheap champagne, and smile at people I did not like. I was going to walk through the fire because I had nothing left to burn. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the courthouse behind. I drove toward the city lights, carrying a silence that was heavy with secrets. The night was young, and I had a feeling that the darkness was about to offer me something unexpected, As I drove through the snowy streets, the heater in my car rattled, struggling to fight the freezing temperature. My mind, however, drifted far away from the ice in the gray sky. It pulled me back 7 years to the scorching heat of Austin, Texas. That was where the lie began. I met Evan at a local jazz bar where he was playing the piano. He was the owner of a small boutique music studio, and to my 27-year-old eyes, he was perfection personified. He was articulate, charming, and possessed a quiet confidence that drew people in like moths to a flame. I, on the other hand, was a mess. My mother had passed away just 2 months prior from a sudden stroke, leaving me unmoored and desperate for something solid to hold on to. I was drowning in grief, and Evan looked like a lifeboat. I remember our third date vividly. We sat on the hood of his truck, looking at the stars. I was crying, talking about how much I missed my mom. He didn't look away or check his watch. He just reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Grace," he had said, his voice low and soothing. "You've been fighting alone for so long. Let me take care of you. I promise I won't let you fall." Those words were the trap. I didn't see it then. I only saw a man who wanted to protect me. I fell for him with a speed that now makes me nauseous. We were married 11 months later in a small ceremony. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. I thought I had found my sanctuary. But the cage was built slowly, one bar at a time. The control started so subtly that I mistook it for love. It began with my friends. Evan would make small, disparaging comments about them after we hung out. He would say they were too loud or too shallow, or that they secretly disrespected him. "I don't think Jessica actually cares about you, Grace," he told me one night over dinner, swirling his wine glass. "She just calls you when she needs something. I hate seeing you used like that. You deserve better friends." I believed him. I slowly stopped answering Jessica's calls, then Sarah's, then my cousin's. I isolated myself to please him, convinced that he was the only one who truly understood me. Then came the money. 6 months into our marriage, he suggested we merge our accounts. It made sense logically. But soon, he insisted on managing the bills because I was working long hours and he wanted to reduce my stress. It sounded like a favor. "You work so hard, baby," he said, taking the checkbook from my hands. "Let me handle the boring stuff. You just relax." Within a year, I had to ask him for permission to buy groceries. I had to justify every coffee, every tank of gas. If I spent too much, he wouldn't yell. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he would sigh, a sound of profound disappointment that cut deeper than any scream. "I'm trying to build a future for us, Grace," he would say, looking at me with sad eyes. "And you're spending money on frivolous things. It makes me feel like you don't respect my effort." I would apologize. I always apologized. The illusion finally cracked the day I told him I was pregnant. I expected joy. I expected him to pick me up and spin me around. Instead, he looked at the positive test sitting on the bathroom counter and then looked at me with a cold, flat expression I had never seen before. "Well," he said, turning back to the mirror to adjust his tie, "I hope you know this means you can't be as lazy as you have been lately. A baby requires discipline, Grace." That was the moment the temperature in our marriage dropped to 0. He stopped touching me. He stopped asking about my day. He treated my pregnancy not as a miracle, but as an inconvenience that ruined his schedule. Driving toward the party now, the memories connected in my head like a constellation of scars. It was never love. It was ownership. He had found a broken woman, glued her back together just enough to stand, and then demanded she serve him for the rest of her life. And when I finally tried to break free, he decided to destroy me. When Harper was born, The air in our home changed. It did not become lighter or filled with the joy of new life. Instead, it became heavy and suffocating, like the pressure drop before a tornado touches down. Evan stopped being just a husband and became a warden. His moods were an erratic pendulum that I could never predict. One moment he would be bringing me herbal tea and rubbing my swollen ankles, whispering about how beautiful I looked. An hour later, he would be screaming because a towel was folded incorrectly, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. The financial noose tightened until I could barely breathe. I was the one working 40 hours a week at North Star Metrics, bringing home a steady, substantial paycheck. Evan's music studio had not turned a profit in 2 years. Yet, when I tried to log into our bank account to pay for Harper's pediatrician bill, the password had been changed. When I asked him about it, he turned the situation around with a terrifying calmness. "You are so careless with money, Grace," he said, shaking his head as if he were scolding a child. "I changed the password to protect our future. You're bleeding us dry with all these unnecessary expenses." "Unnecessary!" I shot back, frustration rising in my throat. "I bought diapers and formula. Evan, that is all I bought." "You always have an excuse," he muttered, walking away. The first time he threatened to take Harper away, I thought I had misheard him. It was 3 a.m. Harper had been crying for an hour, suffering from colic, and I was exhausted, pacing the hallway with her in my arms. Evan stormed out of the bedroom, his eyes wild. "Can't you shut her up?" he hissed. "I'm trying." "Evan," I whispered, rocking her gently. "She's in pain." He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "You are incompetent. You know that you are anxious, you are frantic, and you are making her worse. If you don't get your act together, Grace, I will take her. No judge will give custody to a woman who can't even soothe her own child." That threat planted a seed of terror in my chest that grew into a forest of panic attacks. I spent my nights awake, clutching Harper to my chest, listening to Evan's breathing from the other room, terrified that if I closed my eyes, he would snatch her away. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I a bad mother? Was I hysterical but a small, rational part of my brain? The data analyst part knew that the numbers didn't add up. I started keeping a secret log. I bought a small black notebook and hid it inside the lining of my winter coat. I wrote down dates, times, and direct quotes. I documented his drinking. I documented the nights he didn't come home. Then came the day that shattered everything. I came home early from work to find a letter on the kitchen counter that Evan had forgotten to hide. It was a final notice for a business loan. My eyes scanned the paper, and my knees nearly gave out. The loan was for $50,000, and it was in my name. I waited for him to come home. When he walked through the door, I held the paper up, my hand shaking uncontrollably. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You forged my signature. Evan, you took out $50,000 in my name." He didn't panic. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me with a chilling indifference and poured himself a glass of water. "It was for the studio," he said, shrugging. "Investment. Since you wouldn't give me the money, I did what I had to do as the head of this household." "I'm filing for divorce," I said. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "I am done, Evan. I am taking Harper, and I am leaving." He turned to look at me then, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a man who was defeated. It was the smile of a hunter who had just watched the prey step into the trap. "Go ahead, Grace," he said softly. "Try." I filed the papers the next morning, believing that the truth and the law would protect me. I thought I was finally taking control. I had no idea that by filing that motion, I was simply triggering the mechanism of a trap he had been building around me for years. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The lawyer standing beside Evan, a man in a bespoke charcoal suit who charged $700 an hour, was being paid with the very money Evan had fraudulently borrowed in my name. I was literally financing my own destruction. Evan's strategy was not to prove he was a good father. He knew he could not win on that front. His strategy was to prove that I was dangerous. They painted a caricature of me, twisting my anxiety and my postpartum struggles into a diagnosis of severe mental instability. Ms. Holloway, Evan's lawyer said, his voice smooth and predatory as he paced in front of the judge. Is it true that on the night of November 12th, you sent a text message to my client stating, and I quote, "I want to end it all." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. That is taken out of context. I was talking about the argument. I meant I wanted to end the fighting. Please answer yes or no. Ms. Holloway. Yes, but... Thank you. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is a woman who admits to suicidal ideation while caring for an infant. They projected screenshots of my texts on a screen, messages I had sent in moments of desperation, begging Evan to come home or telling him I was scared because Harper had a fever, were presented as evidence of hysteria. They stripped away the context of his abuse and left only my reaction to it. I looked like a madwoman. Then came the witness, Marcus, a sound engineer who worked at Evan's studio, took the stand. Marcus had eaten dinner at our table. I had made him lasagna. Now, he avoided my eyes. I have seen Grace come to the studio in a rage. Marcus lied, his voice steady. She was throwing things, screaming at Evan in front of clients. She seemed totally out of control. Liar, I shouted, standing up before I could stop myself. I have never been to your studio during work hours. Order, the judge barked. My lawyer, Mrs. Gable, pulled me down by my sleeve. Grace, stop. You are doing exactly what they want. But he's lying, I whispered, tears of frustration burning my eyes. He's making it all up. I know, she whispered back, her face grim. But we can't prove it yet. If you scream, you prove them right. I sank back into my chair. I felt trapped in a nightmare where logic did not exist. Mrs. Gable tried to point out the inconsistencies in Marcus's timeline, but without hard evidence. It was just my word against theirs, and I was the unstable one. The proceedings dragged on for 3 days. I stopped sleeping. I would lie awake until 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, terrified of what the next day would bring. By the final day of the hearing, I had dark circles under my eyes and my hands had a subtle tremor. Evan, by contrast, looked well-rested and calm. He looked like the responsible parent. When the judge finally spoke, the room felt like a vacuum. Based on the testimony regarding the mother's current mental state and the erratic behavior displayed, the judge said, not looking at me, the court finds it in the best interest of the child to grant temporary primary custody to Mr. Mercer. The world stopped. The air left the room. However, the judge continued, Ms. Holloway will be granted supervised visitation rights to be conducted in the presence of a court-appointed monitor, pending a full psychological evaluation. Supervised, as if I were a criminal, as if I were a monster who would hurt my own daughter. I looked at Evan. He did not look surprised. He did not look relieved. He looked bored, as if he were checking off an item on a grocery list. That was when I realized this wasn't a gamble for him. He had known the outcome before we even walked through the doors. He had orchestrated every scream, every text, and every sleepless night to lead to this exact moment. I don't understand, I stammered as Mrs. Gable packed her briefcase. He took her. He actually took her. We will appeal, Grace, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. But for now, you have to hand over Harper's things to him. I walked out of that courtroom not as a mother, but as a ghost, and Evan walked out with my life in his pocket. I unlocked the door to the studio apartment I had been renting for the past 2 months. It was a sterile, beige box on the edge of town, furnished with things I had bought in a rush at a discount store. It did not smell like home. It smelled like lemon cleaner and stale air. This was my sanctuary, the place I had fled to when the marriage finally collapsed. But tonight it felt more like a holding cell. The silence hit me the moment the lock clicked shut. It was a physical weight, pressing against my eardrums. In the house I used to share with Evan, silence was something I prayed for. Now, it was my enemy. I walked to the center of the room and stood there, still wearing my court clothes, my coat dripping melting snow onto the cheap carpet. I looked at the empty spot on the rug near the television. My mind played a cruel trick on me. For a second, I saw Harper there. I saw her chubby little legs trying to run, her hands reaching up to me, her face sticky with oatmeal. I heard her voice, clear as a bell, echoing off the bare walls. "Mommy. Mommy." I blinked, and the ghost vanished. The pain in my chest was so sharp I had to grab the back of the sofa to stay upright. It felt like my heart was literally tearing apart. I wasn't just missing her, I was grieving a living person. I walked to the closet to find a dress for the party. My hand brushed against a large box on the top shelf, wrapped in shiny red paper with a gold bow. It was a dollhouse. I had bought it in October, hiding it away for Christmas morning. I had imagined her face when she tore the paper. I had imagined us setting up the tiny furniture together, her small fingers placing the chairs in the wrong rooms. Now, that box sat there like a tombstone. She would be opening presents with Evan. He would probably tell her I didn't send anything. He would probably tell her I forgot. I didn't forget, baby. I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracking. I could never forget you. I thought about not going to the party. God knows I didn't want to. The last few weeks at North Star Metrics had been a nightmare. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on my back every time I walked to the break room. They knew. In a company that thrives on data, gossip travels faster than fiber optics. I had seen them stop talking when I entered the room. I had seen the pity in their smiles, the way they quickly looked down at their phones. My productivity had plummeted. Numbers that used to sing to me now looked like hieroglyphics. My boss, Mr. Henderson, had called me into his office yesterday. He was a kind man, but he was awkward with emotions and hated conflict. "Grace," he had said, tapping his pen on the desk. "I know things are tough right now, but you should come to the Christmas party. It's good to, get out, show face. Don't let this define you." He was right, even if it made me want to scream. If I stayed home, I was the tragic victim. If I went, I was the survivor. I forced myself to shower. I forced myself to put on makeup to hide the dark circles and the redness in my eyes. I put on a dark green velvet dress that used to fit me perfectly, but now hung a little loose around my waist. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. She looked hollowed out, but her jaw was set. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving the suffocating silence behind. As I drove toward the convention center, the snow began to fall harder. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a hypnotic rhythm. I tried to focus on the road, on the party, on the polite conversations I would have to endure about quarterly projections and holiday plans. But as the city lights grew closer, a strange sensation crawled up my spine. It wasn't just anxiety. It was something primal. The hair on the back of my arms stood up. It felt like the air pressure was dropping before a storm. It felt like the static electricity before a lightning strike. "Something is wrong," I muttered to the dashboard, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I had spent 7 years being gaslit, told that my instincts were crazy. But tonight, my instinct was screaming at me. I wasn't just walking into a party. I was walking into something else entirely. The vast parking lot of the convention center was a sea of luxury sedans and SUVs, their windshields reflecting the festive red and green lights strung along the building's facade. I found a spot in the back row, far away from the entrance. I turned off the ignition and sat in the sudden quiet, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was trying to summon the courage to open the door, to walk across the asphalt, and to pretend that my life was not in shambles. Then, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a singular, sharp vibration that seemed louder than it should have been. I glanced down. It was not a text from my mother checking in, nor a message from my boss asking where I was. It was an email. The sender field was blank, a string of random alphanumeric characters that meant nothing. The subject line, however, made my breath hitch in my throat. You need to hear this before tonight. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. A part of me wanted to throw the phone out the window and drive away. But curiosity is a cruel master. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. There was no text in the body of the email. There were only 3 audio attachments. I pressed play on the first file. The sound of clinking glass filled the car speakers, followed by background noise that sounded like a busy bar. Then, a voice cut through the static. It was a voice I had woken up next to for 7 years. She is completely broken, Evan said. His voice was thick, arrogant, dripping with a self-satisfaction that made my skin crawl. You should have seen her face in court. It was pathetic. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. A second voice, male and unfamiliar, laughed. And the lawyer? That was not cheap. Worth every penny, Evan replied. And the best part is that Grace paid for him. Well, technically the bank did, but her credit score is going to be the one taking the hit. I borrowed $50,000 in her name, hired the shark, and used the shark to crush her. It is poetic justice. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. I knew he had taken the loan, but hearing him brag about using it to hire the lawyer who destroyed me was a level of cruelty I had not imagined. I clicked the second file with trembling fingers. What about Marcus? The other man asked. Is he solid? Marcus is fine, Evan scoffed. I told him if he backed my story about her being crazy at the studio, I would promote him to lead engineer. The guy would sell his own mother for a mixing console. Grace never stood a chance. We painted her as unstable, and she walked right into it. She cried on the stand. It was perfect. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and fast. I felt nauseous. The witness testimony that had cost me my daughter was purchased with a promotion. I played the third file. This was the one that changed everything. But do you actually want the kid? The stranger asked. I thought you hated the responsibility. There was a pause in the recording. Then Evan spoke, his tone dismissive and cold. Harper. She is a prop, man, a bargaining chip. I don't want to raise a toddler alone. God, no. But as long as I have her, I have control over Grace. And I have leverage for the asset division. Once I get the house and the settlement, Grace can have the brat back on weekends for all I care. I just needed to win. He laughed then. It was a low, ugly sound that echoed in the small cabin of my car. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor mat. He doesn't want her, I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage so intense it felt like burning coal in my chest. He just wants to win. I sat there, paralyzed by the revelation. My grief was evaporating, replaced instantly by a cold, hard fury. I wasn't just a victim of a bad marriage. I was the victim of a calculated conspiracy. My phone buzzed again from the floor. I reached down and picked it up. A text message had just come through from the same unknown number. Don't go in. Dangerous. I stared at the words. Someone was warning me. Someone knew Evan was inside. and they knew what he was capable of. The logical thing to do was to drive to the police station. The safe thing to do was to leave. But I looked up at the glowing entrance of the convention center. Evan was in there. He was probably drinking champagne, laughing with his colleagues, acting the part of the grieving, devoted father who had just saved his daughter from an unstable mother. Dangerous! I read the word aloud. I reached into my purse and pulled out a tissue. I wiped the tears from my cheeks. I fixed my mascara in the rearview mirror. My eyes were no longer the eyes of a woman who had lost everything. They were the eyes of a woman who had just found a weapon. You have no idea what dangerous is. Evan, I said to my reflection. I opened the car door and stepped out into the freezing night. I did not run. I did not hide. I walked straight toward the lights. The ballroom was a sensory assault of gold tinsel and jazz music. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a fracturing light over the crowd of North Star Metrics employees who were busy balancing champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. I walked into the room, and the noise seemed to dampen around me. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible and substantial all at once. My colleagues offered polite, tight-lipped smiles as I passed, their eyes darting away the moment I made contact. They saw a woman who had lost her child. I knew I was a woman who was about to start a war. I scanned the room, looking for a place to hide, when my eyes landed on a figure standing near the emergency exit. It was Aiden Cross, the lead cybersecurity engineer who had transferred to our branch only 3 months ago. He was a quiet man, usually glued to his laptop in the server room, but tonight he looked agitated. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes scanning the crowd with a nervous intensity. When our eyes met, he froze. Then, he immediately looked down at his shoes and started to turn away. The reaction was too sharp, too guilty. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The anonymous email. The technical expertise required to intercept private audio files. The warning. I moved through the crowd, ignoring the greetings of a junior analyst who tried to wave me down. I intercepted Aiden just as he was reaching for the door handle. "It was you," I said, my voice low but steady. Aiden flinched. He looked around to see if anyone was watching us. "Grace, keep your voice down, please." "You sent the recordings." I pressed, stepping into his personal space so he couldn't retreat. "Why, who are you?" He let out a long, shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. I didn't think you would actually come in. I told you it was dangerous." "Tell me why you have recordings of my ex-husband," I demanded. "I knew Evan in Texas," Aiden confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. 7 years ago, we were in a production collective together. I watched him charm investors out of thousands of dollars and then vanish. I watched him destroy a friend of mine, a girl named Sarah, using the exact same playbook he used on you. Isolate, gaslight, destroy. I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You knew him." "I recognized him the day you brought him to the office picnic last year," Aiden said. "He didn't recognize me. I've changed a lot since then. But I started watching him. When I heard about the custody case, I couldn't sit back. Not again." "How did you get the audio?" "He is arrogant, Grace. He uses the same password for everything. Well, let's just say I bypassed his cloud security." Aiden looked me dead in the eyes, his expression grim. "I found a folder. He keeps trophies, recordings of arguments, photos of legal documents, and videos." "Videos?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Nanny cam footage," Aiden said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "He has footage of himself screaming at Harper when you aren't there. He calls her names. He scares her to make her cry so he can record it and blame her distress on missing you. It is psychological torture." I felt the room tilt. I grabbed Aiden's arm to steady myself. The image of Evan terrorizing my 2-year-old daughter just to manufacture evidence made me want to vomit. But beneath the nausea, a steel rod of determination snapped into place. "Give it to me," I said. "I need all of it." "I have it on a drive," Aiden said. "But Grace, you need to understand something. This isn't just about custody anymore. I found emails between him and his lawyer. They are filing a motion next week to freeze your assets. He wants the house, your savings, and your retirement fund. He is planning to leave you destitute." "Let him try," I hissed. "You don't understand," Aiden said, gripping my shoulder urgent. "He is not just planning legal action. He is here, Grace, tonight." I froze. "What?" "He is a guest of the new VP of Marketing," Aiden whispered, looking over my shoulder. "And he didn't come alone. He brought his lawyer. They are celebrating. They think you are at home crying in your pillow." I turned slowly to look at the VIP section on the raised platform at the far end of the hall. "He thinks he has won," Aiden said. "He is wrong," I replied, smoothing down the front of my velvet dress. "He just walked into a trap." Shy, I stood in the shadow of a towering artificial spruce tree, clutching a glass of sparkling water like a shield. From my vantage point, the VIP section looked like a different world, elevated and glowing with golden light. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on the table near the center. Evan was there. He was leaning back in a leather chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, laughing at something his expensive lawyer was saying. They clinked glasses. It was the sound of victory. To everyone else, they were just two men enjoying a holiday party. To me, they were conspirators celebrating the destruction of a mother and child. "Look at him," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He looks so peaceful." "He thinks the war is over," Aiden murmured, stepping up beside me. He held his phone low, shielding the screen with his body. "But he is wrong. Grace, you need to listen to this last file. I just decrypted it while you were parking." He handed me a small, wireless earbud. I hesitated, terrified of what new horror awaited me, but I placed it in my ear. Aiden tapped the screen. Evan's voice was crystal clear, devoid of the charming timbre he used in public. "The visitation rights are just a temporary annoyance. Once the asset freeze goes through next week, she won't be able to afford her apartment. When she becomes homeless, I will file for an emergency motion to revoke visitation entirely. She won't ever see Harper again." The air in my lungs turned to glass. I felt a scream rising in my throat, a primal, animalistic sound of pure grief and rage. But I forced it down. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. He wasn't just taking my daughter. He was erasing me from her life completely. "I am going to kill him," I said, my voice shaking. "I am going to walk over there and—" "No," Aiden cut in, his voice sharp and commanding. "If you make a scene, security throws you out, and Evan wins. He gets to call the police and say you are hysterical. We have to be smarter." Aiden turned me slightly, pointing toward a round table near the orchestra pit. A stern-looking man with silver hair was sitting there, sipping wine and checking his watch. "Do you know who that is?" Aiden asked. "No," I replied. "That is Thomas Sterling," Aiden said. "He is the state court monitor for custody oversight. He is the person who audits the judges and social workers. He is here as a guest of the CEO, the oversight officer." I looked at the man. He looked unapproachable, like a statue carved from granite. "If he hears these tapes," Aiden said, his eyes intense, "if he sees the metadata proving Evan fabricated the evidence, he has the power to intervene immediately. He can suspend the ruling pending an investigation, but we have to get to him before Evan sees us." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was a suicide mission. If I approached a high-ranking official at a private party, I could look insane. But I looked at Evan again, laughing as he plotted to make me homeless, and the fear evaporated. "Let's go," I said. We took 2 steps out of the shadows before the atmosphere shifted. Evan, who had been scanning the room with the lazy arrogance of a king, stopped laughing, his eyes locked onto mine across the crowded ballroom. For a second, his face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks. He hadn't expected me. He thought I was broken, crying in my dark apartment. Seeing me here, in a velvet dress, standing tall, was a glitch in his perfectly designed matrix. Then, the mask slammed back into place. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, and began to weave through the crowd toward me. He moved with a purposeful stride, his face arranging itself into an expression of deep, tragic concern. "Stay calm," Aiden whispered, stepping back slightly to give me room. "Don't let him trigger you." So Evan reached me, ignoring Aiden completely. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip tight and possessive. He spoke loud enough for the nearby groups to hear. "Grace. Oh my God. Grace." He looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "What are you doing here after everything you have been through this week? Is this really the best place for you?" "You look exhausted." He was doing it again. He was painting the picture of the unstable ex-wife for the audience. A few colleagues nearby stopped talking and looked over, their expressions pitying. I looked at his hand on my shoulder. Then I looked up into his eyes. I did not pull away. I did not scream. I did not cry. "I am fine, Evan," I said, my voice smooth and cool, distinct from the trembling wreck I had been in court. "Actually, I have never been better." Evan blinked. The concern on his face faltered for a microsecond, replaced by confusion. He squeezed my shoulder harder, his fingernails digging into my skin through the velvet. "You're in denial, sweetie," he said, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper that only I could hear. "Go home, before you embarrass yourself. You don't belong here anymore." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that I had never shown him before. "I am not going anywhere," I replied, leaning in close. "Enjoy your champagne, Evan. It might be the last thing you enjoy for a very long time." I stepped out of his grip and brushed past him. Evan stood frozen, his hand still suspended in the air. He turned to watch me, his eyes narrowing. He realized the game had changed, but he had no idea that the pawn he thought he had discarded was about to checkmate the king. We maneuvered Mr. Sterling away from the cacophony of the jazz band and toward a quiet alcove near the coat check. He was a man who carried the weight of his office in his posture, stiff and imposing. He looked annoyed at the interruption, swirling the red wine in his glass with impatient movements. "This had better be important," Sterling said, his voice gravelly. "I am here to enjoy the holidays, not to discuss case files." "It is not just a case file," Aiden said, his hands moving rapidly over his tablet. "It is evidence of perjury, fraud, and admitted psychological abuse in the Mercer versus Holloway ruling, and it is happening right under your nose." Before Sterling could protest, Aiden pressed play. The silence in the alcove was shattered by Evan's voice, amplified by the high-quality speakers of the tablet. We skipped the preamble and went straight to the confession. The sound of Evan laughing about using Harper as a bargaining chip echoed off the marble walls. "Harper. She is a prop. Man. Just a bargaining chip. I don't want to raise a toddler alone." "God, no." The color drained from Thomas Sterling's face. He stopped swirling his wine. He looked from the tablet to me, his eyes widening in horror. The arrogance of the admission was so blatant that it left no room for interpretation. "There is more," Aiden said, his jaw tight. "We have him on record admitting to falsifying the domestic disturbance reports and bribing a witness with a promotion." Sterling set his wineglass down on a side table with a sharp clink. The annoyance was gone, replaced by the terrifying efficiency of a bureaucrat who has just discovered a major violation. "Send these files to my secure server," Sterling commanded, pulling out his phone. right now, and send the metadata. I stepped forward. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice was steady. I felt a strange clarity, like the eye of a hurricane. He took out a loan for $50,000 in my name to pay for the lawyer who helped him construct this lie, I said. I did not cry. I did not plead. I simply stated the facts. He has isolated me. He has gaslighted me, and he admitted on tape that he intends to revoke my visitation rights once I am destitute. He does not want our daughter. Mr. Sterling, he wants to punish me. Sterling looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He saw the bruises on my soul, but he also saw the steel in my spine. Stay here, Sterling said, tapping a number into his phone. Do not move. I looked past Sterling's shoulder and saw him. Evan. He was cutting through the crowd, his eyes locked on us. He had lost the veneer of the concerned ex-husband. Now, he looked like a predator whose territory had been breached. His stride was aggressive, and his face was flushed with anger. He had realized that Aiden was not just a socially awkward engineer, and that I was not just a grieving mother. He is coming, I whispered. Aiden stepped in front of me, turning his back to Sterling to form a human shield. Evan reached us, breathless and seething, though he tried to force a smile when he noticed Sterling on the phone. Grace, Evan said, his voice tight and breathless. I think you have bothered Mr. Sterling enough. You are making a scene. We need to go home. Now. He reached for my arm, his fingers hooked like talons. Aiden intercepted him, shoving his chest against Evan's shoulder to block his path. Don't touch her. Get out of my way, Evan snarled, his mask slipping completely. She is my wife, my ex-wife, and she is having a mental breakdown. No, Evan, I said. I stepped out from behind Aiden. I did not shrink away. I stood tall in my heels, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had tormented me for 7 years. The fear that had ruled my life for so long was gone, incinerated by the truth. I am not having a breakdown, I said, my voice clear and loud enough to draw the attention of the people standing nearby. I am finally waking up. You're delusional, Evan spat, looking nervously at Sterling, who was now speaking in low, urgent tones into his phone. Come with me, or I swear to God. Grace, I will call the police and have you committed tonight. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Mr. Sterling is already doing that, I said. Evan froze. What? He is calling the authorities, I continued, savoring the look of absolute confusion spreading across his face. He has the tapes, Evan. He heard you call our daughter a prop. He heard you admit to the fraud. He heard everything. Evan looked at Sterling, then back at me. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. The arrogance dissolved, leaving behind a pathetic, naked panic. No, that's illegal, Evan stammered, his voice rising in pitch. You can't. That is inadmissible. No, I said, leaning in until I could smell the expensive cologne he had bought with my money. And you are about to lose everything. At that moment, Sterling hung up the phone and turned to face us. His expression was no longer that of a party guest. It was the expression of the law. Mr. Mercer, Sterling said, his voice booming in the small alcove. I suggest you remain exactly where you are. Campus security and the local police are on their way. The arrival of the security team was swift and absolute. 4 men in dark blazers materialized from the edges of the room, surrounding Evan just as his composure shattered completely. He was no longer the slick, charming music producer who had fooled a judge. He was a desperate man watching his house of cards incinerate. You cannot touch me, Evan screamed, his voice cracking as a guard gripped his arm. She is the one you want. She is unstable. Look at her. He lunged toward me, His face twisted into a snarl of pure malice, but the security team was faster. They restrained him, pulling his arms behind his back. In the struggle, Evan thrashed violently, and his phone slipped from his inside jacket pocket. It clattered onto the marble floor, landing screen up. The screen was glowing red. It was a recording app, the timer counting up. "He was recording us," Aiden said, pointing at the device. "Right now, without consent." Thomas Sterling stepped forward and picked up the phone. He looked at the active recording, then at Evan with eyes cold as flint. "Illegal surveillance in a private venue," Sterling announced, his voice carrying authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. "Add it to the file. Officer, please remove Mr. Mercer from the premises and hold him for the police." "Grace!" Evan shouted as they dragged him toward the exit, his heels sliding on the polished floor. "Grace, you will pay for this, you... His voice faded as the heavy doors swung shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time in months, it was not oppressive. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Sterling turned to me. His expression had softened. "Ms. Holloway, given the audio evidence provided by Mr. Cross and the erratic, threatening behavior witnessed by myself and 50 other guests, I am exercising my authority to suspend the current custody arrangement immediately. I am reopening the case effective this second." I stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, my lungs expanded, drawing in air that tasted sweet and clean. The invisible weight that had been crushing my chest since the trial vanished. "Thank you," I whispered. It was all I could manage. Aiden gently touched my elbow. "Let's get you out of here." We walked through the lobby and pushed open the glass doors. The winter night greeted us, but the biting wind no longer felt hostile. Snow had begun to fall in earnest, large, soft flakes drifting down from the dark sky. They caught the light of the Christmas decorations, turning the world into a shimmering globe of silver and gold. I stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at the sky. A sob ripped through my throat, then another. I covered my face with my hands and wept. I did not cry because I was sad. I cried because the adrenaline was leaving my body, replaced by a profound, overwhelming relief. The nightmare was over. "It is okay," Aiden said softly, standing beside me like a sentinel. "Let it out." I thought I lost her. I choked out, wiping my eyes. "I thought I lost her forever." "You didn't," Aiden replied, "and I am not going anywhere. Grace, I will help you with the digital forensics. I will help you with the lawyers. We will make sure he never hurts either of you again." My phone vibrated violently in my clutch. I pulled it out, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. It was an official notification from the Department of Family Services, forwarded by Sterling's office. "Emergency order granted immediate temporary custody of minor child. Harper Mercer is returned to mother, Grace Holloway, pending full investigation. Law enforcement has been dispatched to retrieve the child." I read the words twice. Then I read them a third time. My legs gave out, and I sank to my knees on the snowy pavement. The cold seeped through my stockings. But I did not care. I clutched the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. "She is coming home," I whispered. "Aiden, she is coming home tonight." Aiden offered me his hand. I took it and pulled myself up. I brushed the snow from my dress and looked at my reflection in the glass doors. The woman staring back was not the victim who had walked into the party terrified and alone. She was a warrior who had walked through fire to save her child. I took a step forward into the night, the snow crunching under my heels. The Christmas lights twinkled above me, guiding the way. I was going to get my daughter. I was going to take her home, wrap her in her favorite blanket, and never let her go. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Evan's karma. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.